Examine the relationship.
Beautiful day in Chicago today, and we are going to talk about engines. Now, we're not going to learn how they function. We'll do that next week, but I just want to give you a high-level overview, and we'll talk about some of the specifications and parts that differentiate one engine from another. The engine of a vehicle is the big metal thing underneath the hood of the car that makes the wheels of the car spin. And it's important to know about the engine because it's the most expensive mechanical component in your vehicle. So when you're buying a car, the engine is in large part what you're paying for. Powerful engines with high horsepower make sports cars go fast. Engines with high torque help pickup trucks tow heavy loads, and engines that are economical help economy cars get good gas mileage. And the first characteristic we're going to discuss is engine size. Engines are measured in liters, and a small engine is going to be 1.5 or 2 liters. They're typically found in economy cars. Mid-size 4-door sedans, family sedans typically have 3-liter engines. My SUV has a 3.5-liter engine. Big, powerful sports cars like the Ford Mustang have 4.6 or 5-liter engines. Engines that are larger than 6 liters are considered decadent or extravagant or too big. The next specification is number of cylinders. So if we were to look at my vehicle from up above and look at the drivetrain, so the engine would be, here we go, up front here underneath the hood, and that engine is connected to the transmission. That transmission is connected to the drive shaft. That drive shaft's connected to the differential, and finally these axles are connected to the wheels. So the engine creates a bunch of power that allows the wheels of the vehicle to spin. All of these parts are connected, so when one of them rotates, the other rotates as well. So eventually the power from the engine gets back to the wheel. The power inside of the engine is created inside of these cylinders. Okay, my Toyota 4Runner has 6 cylinders, and the more cylinders a vehicle has, the more power it's able to create. Small economy vehicles have 4-cylinder engines. Mid-size sedans have 6-cylinder engines. Sports cars have 8-cylinder engines. Big heavy-duty trucks tend to have 8-cylinder engines as well. Anything over 8 cylinders tends to be considered extravagant or needless. Like the Dodge Viper has a 10-cylinder engine, and some Lamborghinis have V12 or 12-cylinder engines. And then there are valves. Valves are a tricky one, but the number of valves determines how high performance an engine is going to be. So it's interesting to think about. So the way you got to think about it is an engine does a couple of things, okay? It inhales air and gasoline vapor, and then there's an explosion in which it creates power, and then it exhales those exhaust fumes. The valves are a little metal part that pops up and allows air to come in, and then there's another valve that pops up and allows exhaust gases to escape. So each cylinder in your engine has 2 valves, an intake valve and an exhaust valve. But some high performance engines will have 4 valves, 2 intake valves, 2 exhaust valves. So really the only thing you need to know is the more valves per cylinder equals high performance. So if you're looking at 2 4-cylinder engines, one has 8 valves, the other has 16 valves, you want to go for the 16 valve if you want more performance, okay? The next thing to consider are turbochargers and superchargers. And these are interesting things to think about as well. A turbocharger, think of it as like a little hairdryer, okay, that's bolted onto the engine that forces more air into the engine, and so it kind of juices the engine up and makes it faster than it otherwise would be. Turbochargers became popular in the 80s in rally cars that weren't allowed to have engines that were larger than 2 liters in size. So in order to make their vehicles more powerful, what engine makers did, what car makers did, was to add turbochargers on there, and so they would have 4-cylinder 2-liter engines in cars that were as powerful as 8 or 10 or 12-cylinder engines. And so superchargers and turbochargers do the same thing in different ways, but they are considered desirable because they make a vehicle more powerful. The downside to a turbocharger or a supercharger it adds a little bit of complication. They may break down, which means more expense when it comes to repair costs. So turbochargers and superchargers are good things. They're desirable. They're kind of like steroids. They make your engine more powerful than it would naturally be. The downside is maintenance costs and purchase costs. So they drive up the cost of the car, and there's a little more maintenance that needs to be done. When the turbocharger explodes at 70,000 or 100,000 miles, you're going to have to replace it, and that's not always cheap. Now that we've talked about some of the components involved in an engine, let's talk about some performance measurements, some numbers. The point of an engine is to get you from point A to point B, and what differentiates one engine from another, in addition to the components that we talked about, are performance measurements like horsepower, torque, and gas mileage. So the more horsepower and the more torque and the better the gas mileage a vehicle has, the more desirable it is. So a typical economy car might have something like 150 or 200 horsepower, whereas a mid-size sedan might have something like 300 horsepower. A sports car or a muscle car might have 400 or 500 or 600 horsepower. Torque and horsepower are both measurements of power in an engine, but the way to think about horsepower is the higher the horsepower in a vehicle is, the higher its top speed is going to be, the quicker it's going to be. The higher the torque is, the better it's going to be at pulling. A Ferrari will have really high horsepower. There are Ferraris with 400, 500, 600 horsepower, and those vehicles are built for speed, for acceleration and high top speed. But some pickup trucks that have very, very high torque, I should say, are very good at pulling or towing heavy loads. And there's a difference. A good way to think of it is a runner versus a football player. I mean, runners can run really fast, right? Sprinters, but football players have torque. They can move things. They can move other football players. Another good way to think of it is you wouldn't use a Ferrari to tow a boat, because although you can go very, very fast in a Ferrari, those things are not made to move very heavy things slowly. If you think of some kind of blender or a mixer, a blender with high horsepower would whip a milkshake up very quickly, but a blender with high torque would be able to mix very dense cement very slowly. Gas mileage is pretty easy to understand. The higher the gas mileage, the longer a vehicle can go on 1 gallon of gas. So my SUV gets about 18 miles per gallon. Economy cars get 30 miles per gallon. Hybrid vehicles tend to get 45, 50 miles per gallon. Sadly, there is no perfect engine. There's no best engine. There are just different engines with different specifications that fit your needs. So if you want a sports car that goes really, really fast, you want a high horsepower engine. If you want to be able to tow heavy loads or go off-road, you want a high torque engine. And if you want an economy car, you just want a small engine that returns good gas mileage. Specifications and horsepower readings are one thing, but real-world reliability and maintenance costs are often another. The general rule is the higher performance a vehicle's engine is going to have, the higher the maintenance costs are going to be. If it has turbochargers or superchargers attached to it, the more stuff, the more features, and the higher the performance an engine's going to have, the higher those maintenance costs are going to be. Let me know what sort of engine your vehicle has. Post in the comments below. And of course, if you're in the market for a new car or a used car, check out my online guide, check out my book. Do something other than just walking into a car dealership, because as a used car buyer, you're at a disadvantage. Even if you're a smart person, it's easy to have the wool pulled over your eyes from people who sell hundreds of cars a week, and you might only buy one car every 4 or 5 years. When I bought my first vehicle, I thought I did everything right. I bought a Japanese vehicle, I had a mechanic inspect it, and it still ended up breaking down a week after I purchased it. After I figured out how to do things properly, I bought my first Porsche for $3,850. I sold it for 3 times what I paid without performing repairs. I bought my second Porsche for $3,500. I sold that for 3 times what I paid. I bought 42 different vehicles, and I sold all of them for more than I paid. You might not be in the market to flip a car for profit, but maybe you want to buy your dream car at a steep discount. Maybe you want to just know what to do to avoid being ripped off and minimize your risk. So check out startingcars.com, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Next week, we're going to learn how an engine works internally, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.